You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I am super excited to have Emily Liebert on the show with me today. She has a phenomenal new book that's just been out for a couple of days now. It's called Perfectly Famous, and I'll tell you what, on your reading shelf for this summer, you have to have this book. It's if you're a lover of thrillers like I am, you're going to absolutely love this book. Welcome to the show, Emily.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I'm excited to have you. We didn't talk about this before we started recording, but I just want to mention that your book last summer that came out, Pretty Revenge, we actually got a pack from the publisher, and I was super excited about talking about that book. And for some reason, I can't remember now, we couldn't make our schedules line up. So I've been excited to talk with you since then about, and then the new book came out, and yeah, I'm a huge fan. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. That's so lovely of you to say.
Absolutely. And we have so much to talk about today, but before we do, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Very, very young, from a very early age, probably maybe even before I can remember, I've been a storyteller. I was the type of kid who would go to sleepaway camp, go to a friend's house, go to day camp, wherever it was I went, and I would come home and I would regale my parents with every detail of what happened. I think possibly some exaggerated, some not, but I always loved storytelling. And I remember from an early age thinking that I wanted to go into the world of writing or journalism in one way or another.
I love that. And looking over your bio, that has held true. I mean, you decided from the looks of it that you were going to get into this world, and you've been working there ever since, haven't you?
I have. I've worked in TV, in magazines, freelance writing, newspapers, everything, and ultimately landed, I guess, at what I really wanted to be doing, which was writing books.
So what was it about telling stories and communicating with people that just seemed to come natural to you? And maybe that's not a fair question because it did come natural, but how did you see other people around you and know that you are different?
So I always have been a studier of people and situations. I remember from a very early age, being in a group of girlfriends, and rather than just, being present in the moment, really thinking about what everyone was going through, what their motives were, maybe what they were thinking, what their lives were like. I always needed a much fuller picture. I never took anything at face value. And I'm also, for that reason, I think typically a very good judge of character early on. And so just having that as part of my personality, and also I love to talk. So that didn't hurt.
I have conversations with my wife and with other people, and I will not pick up on certain cues. We'll be talking about a person that we had some interaction with. I'm trying to think of an example, and I'm not thinking of one, but where I have no idea what this person was wearing, that I just don't pick up on that, but I absolutely could mimic their mannerisms. And know all of their little idiosyncrasies that they do. And I don't know, it's something about the writer's brain that just
definitely.
You just there's something about people that's just fascinating and makes you want to
The
study
devil
them.
is in the details, right?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. You worked in television for a while. What was it about that medium that interested you?
So very early on, I thought I wanted to be a radio sportscaster, radio or TV, I guess. Um, but as it turns out, you need to know a lot about sports for that.
There's a lot of time to fill, isn't there?
I knew a lot about baseball. That was the one sport I knew about because I had been a fan through my childhood, but I didn't know a ton about everything else. So quickly that career seemed like it wasn't going to pan out. And I also thought I wanted to be on air for a while because I like being on TV and it comes sort of naturally to me. But what I didn't want to do was go work in these really small markets in the middle of America in, Iowa or Idaho, and never even know if I was going to be able to work my way up to a big city market. I grew up in Manhattan and I didn't want to really be too far from Manhattan. And as it turns out, most people don't get their start on television in the New York City market. So I went into TV to work behind the scenes, and I worked as initially as an executive assistant and then as a production assistant for Peter Jennings Reporting, which was his documentary show on ABC.
Now that is was a long form show from what I remember about it.
Yes.
So that writing, you really have more space to tell the story that you're trying to tell and to communicate the idea that you're trying to communicate. So that's different than what a lot of people associate with TV news, where it's very kind of machine gun style. You get to the facts, move to the next story.
I mean, he was doing World News Tonight, which was a totally different entity than his documentary shows, which were an hour long, 2 hours long. But make no mistake, I was doing no writing while I was there. I was like ordering the supplies and answering the telephone and like washing Peter Jennings grapes. I was not at the pinnacle of my career during that time. It was an entry-level job.
Sure.
It was a great entry-level job, but it was an entry-level job.
Did that experience, even though you weren't on the storytelling side of it, did you kind of see the machinery behind what was going on, and how did that make you feel about the storytelling business?
I absolutely did see that, and I got the amazing opportunity, obviously, to work for Peter Jennings and also to work for a man named Tom Yellen, who is an executive producer and has been on many shows, and I learned a tremendous amount. Fortunately, one of the things I also learned was that I didn't want to do that for my career. I sort of looked up the ladder at the people who were above me, which I think is the way to do it. And you say to yourself, is that the life or the job that I want? And it wasn't. So I worked there for a few years, and then I left to become a magazine editor.
So magazines, tell me the difference in that life and the television life. You're obviously telling stories in a different way in a different medium, but what's the difference in those two mediums, and how did you see they differed?
Well, for me, again, I wasn't working on World News Tonight, which would have been extremely fast-paced and sort of a consistent schedule. With the documentary show, one of the things that I didn't love about it, looking forward into my future and knowing that I wanted to get married and have children, was that there were times where when you were just starting a show or you were in between shows and nothing was going on. And then when you were in the end of getting the documentaries together, you were there until 3-4 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes my boss wasn't going home. He was staying through 2 days. And I am someone who likes consistency. I don't mind working hard, but I like consistency and knowing what to expect. So when I went to magazines, I had a effectively, 9 to 6 job. And then I did have a lot of events after work, but that was, of course, different than being in the office. And I was the editor-in-chief of a luxury lifestyle magazine in Westchester. So for me, it was a really fun job. I got to do a lot of celebrity interviews and write about travel and fashion and food and beauty. And I was the editor-in-chief for 5 years, and it was great. I loved it.
What's interesting to me is that you have the kind of job there that a lot of people, would find completely fulfilling, getting to, live in this world and report on people that we find fascinating, have conversations with them, and then, creatively get, working on layout and how it's presented. And, that life would be completely satisfying to a lot of people. But in the midst of that, or right after that, you start writing fiction. What was that switch like for you?
So I loved that job. I loved every minute of it. But I think after 5 years of doing it, I started to feel that I could do it in my sleep and I wasn't being challenged in the way that I needed to be. And so I decided to take a leap of faith and leave that job. And I continued writing in that space. I did a ton of freelance writing during that time. Mostly I did a lot of luxury travel writing for many years, which is, by the way, a great gig. And I did a lot of celebrity profiles. And then I felt, for one, I felt during that time that the way the economy was at the time, it was going downward, and they were not hiring freelance writers as much. They were bringing most of the article assignments in-house, which they had never done before. And I saw, sort of that was the trend and the direction things were going in. And in addition to that, I wanted to sink my teeth into bigger projects that didn't have every other day deadlines. I wanted something that I could really create and, marinate with and create characters and plot. And I got the amazing opportunity to edit Kerry Kennedy's New York Times bestseller, Being Catholic Now. So that was my first taste of the book world, and I liked what I tasted. And so I decided to write my own book after that. It all sounds very easy. Obviously, it's, I had to get an agent, and it wasn't easy to do all of that. But, that was how it happened, how my interest was piqued.
So by editing Kerry Kennedy's book and Being Catholic Now, did taking her words and helping massage them and looking for ways she could improve that, did that kind of fire up your fiction writing side? What was that transition like for you?
I think I had always had it in the back of my mind that I wanted to write a novel. I was an avid reader. So that book was definitely a taste of the book world for me, but it was a compilation of interviews she had done with well-known Catholic people, and whether or not they had decided to stick with their faith or not, and how that had affected their lives. So in many ways, that was more like the journalism writing that I had already done. But it definitely prompted me to, go out on a limb and start writing that first novel.
So what was that first novel about?
That first novel has never seen the light of day. And
the beloved
it
desk
did
drawer
get me
novel.
an agent. So I wrote a novel that was somewhat biographical. I had had a little starter marriage that was a couple of years long, no kids. And we actually ended extremely amicably, but he had a very, very difficult, unpleasant family. Many of the members in the family were unpleasant, and difficult. Not all of them, but many were. And it was very cathartic for me to write about that. And I got an agent with that book. And while we were editing it, getting ready to send it out on submission to editors at publishing houses, I came up with the idea to write a book called Facebook Fairy Tales, which ended up being my first book. It was a book of narrative nonfiction, and it was 25 amazing stories that came through Facebook connections. And I was very lucky to get an interview with Mark Zuckerberg for the foreword, which was a real coup at the time. Facebook was exploding in the media. He was very reticent to do interviews and had only done them with a couple of, journalists that were way out of my league, like Diane Sawyer and Oprah, I think. But I somehow managed to finagle a quick interview with him for the foreword. And so that book came out. And by the time that book came out and everything was said and done, I realized I never wanted that original novel to see the light of day. And I wrote a new novel, which ended up being my second book and first novel, called You Knew Me When.
World Anvil is a browser-based world-building platform designed for all world builders, writers and novelists, dungeon masters, game developers, and everyone else. World Anvil keeps your world setting safe and organized, helps you find your characters, locations, plots, timelines, and maps quickly and easily as you write. Then, if you choose, you can showcase your amazing world building to the world, beautifully and interactively, to keep your readers engaged. You can even use our professional tier to build your career selling access to behind-the-scenes content your readers will love and growing your community. Build your world setting in any genre with over 25 custom-built world-building templates, complete with prompts to inspire your creativity. Allow your readers to explore the public parts of your world in an innovative new way with interactive maps, timelines, and wiki-style articles. Give special access to co-authors, beta readers, customers, or patrons to see exclusive behind-the-scenes content. There's a free version to get started with all of the major features. Guild membership offers you a host of extra options, including comprehensive privacy settings, co-authors, presentation options, and so much more. Join our community of over 800,000 world builders, including professional authors. Take part in competitions and learn more about world building at this fantastic online community. Use the coupon code HANK to get 20% off all 6 and 12-month subscriptions. WorldAnvil.com. I'm a recent convert, and I know you will be too.
So, what was the idea behind that first book that was published?
With the You Knew Me When, or
Yes,
Facebook Fairy Tales? You Knew Me When?
Yes, You Knew Me When.
That was the story of two women, Catherine and Lainey, who had been best friends and neighbors growing up and lived on either side of this woman, Luella's house, who is an older woman, more like a grandmother figure to them, and who'd never had kids of her own. And they would swim at her pool all the time, and she became very, very close with them. And really, as I said, a grandmother figure. And Lainey and Catherine ended up having a big falling out before college. And Catherine moved to the city to kind of pursue all the dreams that Lainey had envisioned for herself. And Lainey ended up getting pregnant and stuck home in Vermont, where they grew up. And they didn't talk for, I think, 12 years or something, until they both received letters saying that Luella had passed away and had left the home to them, and that they were either to keep it and work out their difficulties or work together to fix it up and sell it. And so Catherine had to leave her big city job as a cosmetic executive, come home, and deal with this house with her former friend, Lainey, and also a love interest who she had left behind, who was Lainey's brother.
Looking back over your previous books and seeing the growth from your first book to the new book, Perfectly Famous, there seems to be a trend that I have noticed that the books tend to to get darker as you go through your writing career, which I love. I absolutely love. Is this a natural growth for you? Can you talk about your style and the kinds of stories you're telling now compared to the kinds of stories you told when you first broke out?
Yeah, sure. So the first four novels that I wrote were, I would say, solidly in the women's fiction beach read space. I wouldn't call them chick lit, although I'm not opposed to that labeling. I just wouldn't call them that because they did have serious issues in them. My second novel, When We Fall, was about a woman whose husband had died in a tragic accident, and then she found out she was pregnant with their child, and how her life, sort of developed from there. And, the other books were about lost friendships and divorces. And I think just as I grew out of my 20s and into my 30s and ultimately my 40s, those books started being about things that were happening in my life or my friends' lives, which just, naturally, as you grow older, the older you get, the more problems you have, right? And then what happened was, after my fourth women's fiction novel, I decided I wanted to transition more into the psychological suspense space because I'm a little bit of edgier. That's my personality. I wanted to challenge myself to do more of a fast moving plot. And all of my books prior were very character driven. And I still pride myself on very strong characters, but I really wanted the plot to be fast paced and have twists and turns. And I think that the industry tries to sort of pigeonhole and put people in these specific categories of what they write. And I'm somewhat resistant to that because I think that Pretty Revenge, which was my last book, which was the first sort of psychological suspense, if you will, and Perfectly Famous, which is a little bit further into that genre, they still straddle the line of women's fiction, even though there's the revenge or the deception or the even, a child being attacked and abducted, a teenager being attacked and abducted. The actual conversations and interactions, specifically in this book between Bree and Maggie, for example, really do read like women's fiction more to me. So I think that these two books, while categorized as psychological suspense or thrillers, are really both.
I can see that. I think that's perfectly normal for a writer to not only to grow, but to kind of grow into what it is that they're trying to do. And categories are so weird. You take a book, like, how do you categorize it? Why does it have to fit in this bucket or that? But bookstores, we have to
right.
know which way to go. It's so weird. But let's talk about Pretty Revenge for just a minute.
Sure.
Before we start talking about the new book. Where did this book come from, and who is Carrie O'Malley?
So these characters are not based on anyone in my real life. People have asked me that, and I'm like, God, no, these are horrible people. Like, no, that's not me.
Right,
and a lot of people have asked me
Emily.
if I had wanted to seek revenge on someone in my life. And the answer to that is also no. However, I do think that I am a person who can forgive easily, but I don't forget. And so I understand the inclination to want to get back at someone for doing something to you. And in Carrie's case, she really truly believed that Jordana had set her life off course and, for all intents and purposes, ruined her life, which anyone who's rational knows that one little thing that someone does 14 years ago, or however long it was now, I forget, 12, 14 years ago, can't ruin your entire life. That's in part you allowing that to happen. but that's not how she felt. And she happened to be in a very bad place when she also happened to see her former nemesis, Jordana, on television in a very seemingly happy and successful place. And that really ignited her fire to want to seek revenge in a big way.
So when this was the first book that you had kind of officially shifted gears towards psychological suspense, what was that? What was the writing of that like for you? Even though your other books have had those elements where you were consciously going in that direction, what was that shift like for you?
So it took me a lot longer to write this book. And I also made the mistake of not writing an outline with Pretty Revenge. I had been contractually obliged to write outlines for my other novels, even though I changed them often in the writing process. But for this book, for some reason, I decided to throw caution to the wind and just kind of write and see where it took me. And that didn't go well. And it took me a lot longer to write the book. And it meant, despite my agent pleading with me not to do that and to write out outline at some point, I did not listen until the very end. And it took me a long time, and it meant a lot of editing on the back end, which I'm not used to. I'm used to delivering a really clean draft, a really clean first manuscript, and then having, of course, an editing process, but not overhauls.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So that was, I'm sorry, I thought I just lost you for a sec. That was, that was definitely, it took me about a year to write that book, where I write my other books in about 5 months.
Gotcha. So, so you delivered the book. What is the, when you're shifting, categories or genre, was there anything else about the process that was different for you?
I switched publishing houses, which was a big deal. I had been with Penguin Random House, and I sort of decided that in switching genres, and I just wanted to, and I'd been with them for 4 books, and I loved my editor there, and I loved Penguin Random House, but I just wanted a whole new, fresh beginning with this new kind of book, and sort of a second breath of life breathed into my career. And so I moved over to Simon and Schuster, which was definitely a big change. In a great way. Obviously, I'm staying with, because they published Perfectly Famous as well, and they will be publishing my next book.
Excellent. So, Perfectly Famous, this book
Yes.
is such a meta look at writing, and I was looking through your press kit, and someone else said that as well, and I kind of
Yes,
laughed.
totally.
But
I kept saying, everyone keeps calling it meta. I was like,
well, it's if there's one thing that writers love, it's a book about writers.
Completely.
There's just, it's just such a guilty pleasure, if you will, while also being completely accessible to everyone in the in the reading audience. This is not a book for writers, but there's something in there that writers will laugh about. What was the idea for this book? How did this come to you?
So I always like writing about strong women. And as I was thinking about different kinds of strong women that I could write about, I sort of came up with the idea that I wanted to be, there's these strong women who both had just undergone something major in their life, a major loss in some way. Obviously, one loss is much bigger than the other. One is the loss of a child, and the other is the loss of a husband, and the feeling that your teenage child is no longer in need of you anymore as a mother. And I wanted them to both have to sort of try to find a way to fill their own voids, but also ultimately in the end to help each other. And I also loved the idea of someone chasing after someone and trying to find them. So once I had those two kind of overarching ideas, I just started thinking on those, and then it eventually sort of all falls into place.
Right. So when you normally start a new book project, what's the first thing that comes to you? Is it a character? Is it a situation? How does what's the first kernel of the story idea that comes to you?
So it's usually a kernel, as you said, or like a nugget of an idea that will come to me for the plot. For example, with Pretty Revenge, the first nugget of the idea was that as a child, someone would witness something through the window of another house, and that person would try to help the person who is in danger. So that was my original nugget there. And I just told you the nuggets with Perfectly Famous. And then from there, I go very quickly right into who the 2 or 3 main characters are going to be.
Gotcha. So with Perfectly Famous, tell us about Ward DeFleur.
Yes, so that is her pen name. And actually, a friend of mine my very creative friend my friend Anne came up with the name Ward DeFleur. I put it out there on social media. I said, I need a pen name for this extremely successful, larger than life author. And I got some great names. Most people put down their children's names. But some people were a little bit, or their own names, but some people were a little bit more creative. And my friend Anne was one of them. And she came up with that very cool name, which I wasn't sure if the editor or publisher was going to accept, but they ended up loving it too. And she is a hugely famous author, way more famous. Well, I don't consider myself famous, but she is actually famous. She's Danielle Steele level or Jackie Collins or someone like that. And she's written, umpteen books, and but she's very gun shy about being in public places and being around a lot of people, and she gets very anxious. She loves her readers. She loves her fans. She loves communicating with them from the safety of her home behind her computer screen, but she is known in the industry and certainly by the people in her publishing house for getting very anxious and having panic attacks when she has to go on book tour. That is not me, by the way. I do not have that problem.
So, I'm trying to decide how I can talk about this without giving away too much.
Right.
There's a murder that happens.
Yes.
Tell me about, what you decided to put this character in that kind of got the story kicked off in your mind.
So typically with these kinds of suspense or thriller books, there needs to be a major event, I think, that happens. In Pretty Revenge, it was the one character, ruining the other character's life. You end up finding out exactly what happened toward the end of the book. And in Perfectly Famous, it's Ward's daughter being abducted and killed. And, it's just sort of while it's not something that you see or that is really prevalent in the scenes throughout the book, you get the reaction of Ward and how that impacts her life and ultimately makes her flee her lovely town in Connecticut and go someplace where she doesn't want people to find her, and she reneges on all of her future book deals and goes into really a hiding and sort of a depression.
And this is when we meet Bree Bennett.
And that is when we meet Bree Bennett, who is a former journalist and a big fan of Ward DeFleur's books, and is trying to fill the void of her recent divorce and the fact that her teenage daughter, who is the same age as Ward's daughter, and she's trying to fill this void. And despite the fact that her psychologist best friend Maggie warns her against it, she attempts to fill her own void by insinuating herself into Ward's life and trying to find her and tell her story in the town's newspaper, which she has gone back to work for as means of dipping her toe back into the workforce after so many years of being a stay-at-home mom.
There are so many topics that you touch on in this book and so many things that really make us think about our place in the world and our place in our little societies where we live. What were some of the big questions that you had at the beginning that you said, I'm going to try to unravel this thing in this book? Or was there that sort of thinking about the writing of this book?
So unlike Pretty Revenge, I learned my lesson about not writing the outline, and I went in the complete opposite direction with Perfectly Famous, and I wrote a 30-page outline, 30 plus pages, I think, that laid out everything exactly how it was going to happen. I really wanted to flesh out all the twists and turns, the relationships. I mean, obviously, typically I write a lot from what I know and things in my own life or my friends' lives. I do not have any friends, or did not at the time have any friends who have teenage children. My children are much younger, and I have never been through a divorce where a child was involved, or, you know, a marriage that lasted many, many years. And I had never experienced a relationship with a teenage child, specifically a daughter, because I have two sons. And so those were things I really wanted to make sure I got right. And I was so happy because after the book was done, I sent a copy to my friend and a very well-known author named Sarah Pekkanen, who writes with Greer Hendricks. And she has been through a divorce, and she has a teenager, and she said, I can't believe, knowing that you haven't really gone through either of those things in that way, how well you did it. And it was like the biggest compliment, because it's one thing to say, oh, you write the author really well or the journalist really well. Well, yeah, like hopefully I've been in that position, you know?
Yeah, right.
But so those were things I really wanted to flesh out. And the only thing that I changed from that 30-page outline was the ending. And I changed it as I was writing the last line.
That is so amazing. That is
Which
so
was amazing.
No doubt.
I've always wanted to do that. And it had been in the back of my mind, but I didn't know how I was going to work it out. And then it just sort of fell into place.
Well, I'm glad you bring that up, because as someone who has written from an outline and someone who has kind of more freewheeled it, do you consider yourself if someone asks you, are you an outliner, or
yes.
are you a pantser, that you definitely would go with outlining?
No, I'm definitely an outliner, and I will never not outline again. And in fact, I did write a pretty extensive outline for my next book.
Do you ever, the big argument from pantsers is, well, once you've done this elaborate outline, you've written the book. There's nothing exciting to write anymore. Does that ever cross your mind, or do you just look at people like that, like they're crazy?
Either way, I think I generally know what's going to happen. I think it's really hard to write a book without having any sense of what's going to happen. So
Right.
I don't really need it to be exciting for me. For me, it's exciting and the most difficult to get the outline done. And then once that's done, Perfectly Famous was the easiest book I've ever written because I wrote such an extensive outline.
At that point, you're just putting flesh on the bones as you go.
Yeah,
that's the fun of that, isn't it?
Develop. I mean, you're still developing the characters and all that stuff, and you're adding little anecdotes and things like that. But to have those twists and turns in place and know when they're going to happen, I think is extremely important when writing this type of book.
Absolutely. Well, the new book is called Perfectly Famous. It's been out for a couple of days now when you're hearing this. There are links to it in the show notes. I love this book so much, we're going to send everyone to pick up their copy of it. Emily, if people are just learning about you and want to dig into all the great stuff that you do, is there a place where they can connect with you online?
Absolutely. You can go to my website, emilyliebert.com. You can always reach out to me through my contact page there, and all of my social media is on that. But for shortcut, I am at Emily Liebert on Instagram, and I am author Emily Liebert on Facebook.
Excellent. We'll put links to
I am
those
on
as well.
Twitter, but I'm not like huge on Twitter. Like it's not a big thing for me. So I'm really big on Instagram and also Facebook.
Excellent. And we will link those up for everyone to make it easily accessible for them.
Excellent.
Emily, this has been so much fun chatting.
It
Thank
has
you for
been.
joining us
Thank
today.
you. Oh my God. Thank you so much for having me.
Authors, I have a fantastic new service to tell you about. It's called PubSite. PubSite is a service to help you build your very own website, your home on the web, where you can promote your work and give your fans a place to connect with you. PubSite is a website platform that allows every author, regardless of budget, to have a great-looking professional website developed by the book marketing professionals at FSB Associates. PubSite is the new, easy-to-use DIY website builder developed specifically for books and authors. Whether you're an author of one book or 20, or a small publisher, PubSite allows you to build, design, and most importantly, update your website pain-free. No need to be dependent on a designer or webmaster to make a small but costly change to your website. Save the money and do it yourself. PubSite is the best platform for authors because it's a book-centric platform. PubSite was built just for authors and small publishers. Every design, feature, and layout is book-centric. They have customized designs for you to use. It's easy to build. No coding or HTML is necessary to create a stunning, professional-looking website with all the features you want. Get a custom domain name, yourname.com. It's simple to update. You can add all of your books, add a blog and a book tour, sell from any retailer, manage your email list and social media, and even do e-commerce. Build your website with a 14-day free trial, then pay just $19.99 per month, which includes hosting. And we offer packages starting at $499 to set up the website for you. Pub-site.com, the place to help authors find their home on the web.